Kia ora koutou, everybody. I'm the warm-up act. I certainly am not the main act. I feel a little bit fraudulent, really, introducing Cory Doctorow, and I'm also really, really apologetic because I have to leave straight afterwards, after I speak, because I've got to go to something else. I just squeezed in the opportunity to come and look at him. So I've done that. So just a couple of words about him, and then I'm just going to make a few remarks and then I'm going to run away. But is that, I could say a lot of things about Cory Doctorow, but it's stretching thinking is one of them. He writes every day. Do you?
I do. I did today.
Meaningful writing. And I think he thinks about how we can be better people and a better society, and no doubt he's going to share some of that with you today, and I'll look at it online later. I just want to make a couple of remarks. Some of you probably have heard me speak a couple of times now, but I'm going to repeat a few things, say a couple of extra things, just to put in context where this new government sits at the moment on these important issues that I have responsibility for, which is the Minister for New Stuff, the Minister for who we are, or trying to describe better who we are as a people and as a culture, and the Minister for Open Stuff, rather than all those long phrases that John used to describe my cumbersome portfolio titles. Put a bit of context to my role, and 2 years ago the Labour Party in opposition embarked on a piece of work called the Future of Work Commission, which was 12 of us working on what is the likely impact, what are some of the things we haven't thought about around the disruption of technology on work, on the industries that make up our workforce. What impacts might that have? Where are the public policy touch points, and how can we work together to try and work on them? This is what it looks like, www.futureofwork.nz. I'm not going to go into what it found, other than the points I want to make is that it was a piece of joined up thinking. It showed 12 MPs in opposition, most of whom are now in Cabinet or just outside Cabinet, can work together to look at whether it's education, whether it's security of income, whether it's new opportunities in technology, whether it's the impacts of technology on people being dislocated, Māori and Pacific populations, economic opportunities, those sorts of things. Joined up piece of thinking, a systems approach of breaking down the silos of government, very citizen-centric, and ultimately about inclusion and bringing everyone along, and the opportunities and threats. In government, that work is translating into pieces of work that I'm leading, but also working with other ministers on, that is trying to take a systems approach, breaking down the silos, being very citizen-centric and inclusive. And digital inclusion, of course, is a big part of that. How a digital economy can grow, and what are some of the things that we need to do to make that happen. And digital rights, where do they fit in? Because it's all very well focusing on a digital economy, but if we're not looking at where the citizens fit in, what the opportunities and threats are for them, then we're not doing our jobs properly. So when the D5, as it was known, the Digital Five Nations came together, which was an event organised under the previous government, but it was a real opportunity, and it then became the D7, South Korea, the UK, Estonia, Israel, Canada, Uruguay and New Zealand. It was a real opportunity to put digital rights on the agenda, which is really looking at the framework of human rights. Let's be really clear here. Digital rights aren't something different and somehow separate to a human rights framework. They are a human rights framework in a different environment, but perhaps in ways that we haven't thought of yet. And so that's an area of big focus for this government. And thankfully, we had an opportunity to bring a whole lot of other nations around us to decide to work on a piece of work together, which we're just kicking off. And I thought I'd just touch on some of the rights and some of the issues that we're looking at, because it may be that Cory will want to tear them to bits when I've walked out of the room, or reinforce them, or add to them, or all of the above. Things like the line of sight for personal data. Where does your data go? Where does your data, how does it get used? What are your opportunities to ensure that you can follow that? And what is your rights in that area? Algorithmic accountability. I think at Net Hui I talked about algorithmic transparency, and that's because John Edwards had said it to me and I thought it sounded cool. Now I've got a little bit more of an idea of what it actually might mean. To what extent should individuals be informed about how automatic systems are used to process their data? What safeguards are necessary to guard against bias in data sets and protect individual rights? The impact of artificial intelligence on digital rights. Does this require specific attention distinct from any wider consideration of data collection and processing? Digital inclusion, as I've mentioned, that's the right to access, the right to have the skills or the ability to have the skills. How can we make sure that nobody is left behind, that we don't have digital divides, that we don't have internet haves and have-nots, that digital poverty is not the new measure of poverty, that we're not allowing that to happen in our country. And rights versus entitlements. Is it an indisputable right, or is it an entitlement that requires rights to be fulfilled? Where are the boundaries? Should there be boundaries? So these are the areas where those 7 countries can do a really important piece of work that is much bigger than just our little country, that can have an impact much more broadly. I think this is a new area, and I think it's quite exciting. And then just finally, I just want to touch on the lessons learnt in opposition and how you can take them into government with a new approach. And these are the things that I'm speaking a bit aspirationally here about what I would like to try to help bring to the way that we do government. And that is that an acknowledgement that disruption is inevitable, a new approach to risk. I'm kind of thinking about giving a speech on this at some point. Thinking outside the square, and how we do government has got to change. And one of the things that we are doing, which might be interesting for Cory, is that we're introducing into not this budget process, but next year's one, is a well-being framework. So that we're not just looking at the old traditional measures of measuring living standards. We're bringing in well-being as a measure that we will use to measure success in our society. And that's going to have a really big flow-on effect, and I think goes to that citizen-centric approach and rights, which obviously have to flow on into the digital environment. And 4 other things I just want to touch on that we're also talking about is the transitions that we need to make. We're calling it a just transition. Now that might be from the effect of digital disruption on industries, the hollowing out of industries that's happening, the transition from one set of sort of work to another, and what government can do to ensure that people have secure income, have the ability to learn for life, which is another phrase that we're using, and we're starting to realise that with our fees-free tertiary education, which means that people have got the opportunity to keep learning and to be able to afford to keep learning in their life. So the just transition isn't just about that digital disruption, it's also about the transition to a low-carbon economy as well. an active and capable state, an agile government that can be flexible and act and capable to change as it needs to adapt to citizens' needs, and a new social partnership, which sounds a bit Blairite. It's not meant to be, it can't be. It's got to be real, but it has to be some sort of new compact between government, citizens, and organisations, whether they're businesses or NGOs or whatever, to try and make things work better. So that's my introduction, and without further ado, I give you the main act, Cory Doctorow.